Good evening. It's a pleasure to be back here and to discuss the fourth part of the introduction to Mussar. And in the process of speaking about Mussar, we got into many different details, which we're going to have a quick summary of for those of you who were not here during the first three. And then we'll continue on with the finishing touches on understanding the full spectrum of Mussar. So we'll start from the beginning again. And that was the purpose of Mussar, is that we learn about and utilize the strength and weakness that each of us possess. We have traits which are positive traits, we have traits which are negative traits, and what we need to do is utilize each one of those traits to make us a better person. How do you use that? How do you do that? We spoke that the Almighty gave Adam a soul. God created Adam. How did God create Adam? He blew into his nostrils a living soul. Now that's a piece of God in the terms used by our sages. Now obviously God doesn't have pieces. God isn't a form. God isn't a sun or a moon. God isn't on a piece of wood, right? God is a living God, an existing God, but not a physical God. God doesn't catch a cold. You know, there's that famous question, can God create a stone that he can't lift? Right? It's one of those stupid questions. Why? Because if God can't raise a stone, he sees there's something that God can't do. If God can't create it, then there's something God can't do. So it's a catch-22. It's like it goes around and around, right? So you see, God can't create whatever he wants. Well, God is not limited. God can never be limited. Right? Like we said, God can't catch a cold either. God doesn't have a physical form. God infused, what is God? God is we can't get into the terms. We can look at Maimonides about that. But God gives us a selection of traits, of God's perfection in traits. God gives us a bit of each of those traits. And that's the soul that we have. You can't get rid of them. You can ignore them, and they'll deteriorate. Or you can pay attention to them and strengthen them. But they're there. They're embedded in who we are. So we have these traits. We have these traits. And now the first step is identifying those traits. God is perfect in all traits. God is perfect in his kindness. God is perfect in his mercy. God is perfect in his forgiveness. God is perfect in every one of his traits. We want to be God-like. How do we become God-like? So on the simplest level, we say, you know what, God is kind, so I'll be kind. I'll volunteer. Right? But once we dig into the essence of what kindness is, we'll see that there are many more layers of kindness that we ignore when we just say, I'm good with kindness. On the kindness account, I'm fine because I volunteered a month ago, for the food bank. Right? So I'm good. My conscience is quiet. Right? That's not what kindness really means. Right? We'll get into it, and we're going to do, starting the beginning of November, every Monday, we're going to have Mussar Mondays. The flyer is right out there in the lounge. You'll be able to see it there. It's on our website, on torchweb.org. And we're going to be doing a midah, a trait a week. Every week, another trait. And what we're going to try to do in that hour-long class is take the time to investigate what is the trait, looking through the sources of the Torah, and then figuring out ways how we can perfect that trait. Now, it's not going to happen in 1 week, but at least you'll have homework. And you'll have homework, you'll have food for thought for the following long time, following those classes, hopefully. So our purpose here in this world is to be an Adam. What is an Adam? Adam is from the term Adama, like the earth, to grow. Just like the earth, if you don't plant anything, nothing's going to grow. So to Adam, the purpose of Adam is to grow. But there's another word that comes out of Adam, which is adameh, which is to be godlike. Our responsibility in our lifetime is to be adameh, is to be godlike. Godlike. That's our job. That's our responsibility. How do we become godlike? If you look at the Torah, it's very interesting. The Torah does not tell us, what is the Torah? What is the Torah? Right? So we know the Torah could be known as the Bible, the Jewish Bible, or the 5 books of Moses. What's the purpose of the Torah? So the Torah is not a book of rules. It's a big mistake for us to think that the Torah is just a book of rules. It's not a book of rules. That's not what it is. So what is it? The Torah is a manual for living. If Torah is a manual, why isn't it a book of rules? Because if it's a book of rules, you ever saw a law book? Right? Did you ever see a law book that begins, well, in the beginning, God created the heaven? Well, who cares about that? Who cares about that? Why should it just start? Rule number 1, right? Be fruitful and multiply. Rule number 2, circumcise your firstborn. You circumcise all your male children at the 8th day. Rule number 3, and so on and so forth. That's not what the Torah tells us. Torah's first 12 portions have how many commandments? 3 commandments. 3! For what? Right, why do we need those stories? We need to know about God creating the world, and Cain and Abel, and Noah, and the flood, and the Tower of Babel, and Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and the tribes, and Esau. What do we need all these stories for? The reason is because the purpose of those stories is to teach us about life. It's not about observing laws. It's about how you live life. How you find a fulfilling way to live life. And through delving into the traits that are within us, that are embedded, that are gifted within us. And taking those traits, perfecting them, and now continue living life with a perfected element. And then take another part of your character, which is not so perfect, and perfect that. And then slowly perfect all the different aspects of your life. All right, we'll see what the slowly means. Okay. Okay, so if we didn't learn from the Torah how to act and how to have proper character, where would we learn it from? If God didn't give us the Torah. The Talmud tells us that if we didn't have the Torah, where would we learn it from? We would learn it from the animals. Because the animals teach us about traits. Every animal has a trait. We know about a dog. A dog is all heart. Kol lev. It's all heart. Right? You're familiar with that? You know why people say it's man's best friend? Because it's all heart. You could, now I'm not suggesting you do this, but we've all seen someone really be angry at their dog. And they could slap it and say, bad dog! For whatever reason. What happens about 1 minute later? The dog comes right back wagging its tail. You know why? It doesn't have intellect? It has intellect, but it's controlled completely by its emotion. It's all heart. It's all emotion. It forgives. It moves on because now it's controlled by its heart. Now, it's not a suggestion that we should do that. But it is a suggestion that we should use more heart when we do things. Right? So if someone insulted you, therefore you're not going to do the good act. Right? If it's a good act, do the good act. Right? People want to volunteer for the synagogue, but they didn't get the proper thank you. So you're not going to do it any longer? Right? If it's a good act, just overlook it. Human beings are controlled, we're controlled by our intellect, or at least we should be. and being controlled by our intellect. When someone hurts us, our emotions don't let our intellect operate properly. Gets caught up in the way. We discussed this at great length. I think it was the second class, second introduction, part 2 of the introduction to Mussar. You're welcome to go see that. How we get into all the animals and what we learn from them. But the idea is we learn traits, we learn character, we learn from an ant. Do we mention the ant example? Right? Do you know that an Animala is a little ant, right? An ant needs one kernel of food for its entire life. One kernel of food for its entire lifetime. And how much does it collect throughout its lifetime? Over 1,000. Right? Why? It doesn't need so many. Did you ever see an ant just sitting there, relaxing on a beach chair, head behind its shoulder, hands behind its head, with its feet crossed over?
It depends on where you put your chair.
It depends where you put your chair. Yeah, it might be under the chair, but not on top of the chair, right? Ants are always busy. They're moving. They're running. They're this, that. It's like you see if you ever have the sugar left out, and it's ant season in your house. You'll see that there's a long line of ants, right? And they're walking along that line, and there's walking back, and they're busy. There's no red lights. There's no stopping. They're busy. Well, that's in the name of the ant in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's called a Animala. What's a Animala? We learn amelut. Amelut means toil. Constantly be working. Learn from. This is King Solomon tells us in Proverbs. Lech el Animala atzel. Lazy one. Go look at the ant. He doesn't waste time. He doesn't sit, and rest. He's constantly working. You want to know how to not be lazy? Go look at the ant. Always busy. He needs one kernel in a lifetime. And what does he collect? He collects 1,000. Over 1,000 kernels. Okay. So again, the purpose, Mussar is the ability for a person to maximize their potential. The early steps of what we're going to do in Mussar is going to just explore what are those traits and whether or not those traits reside within us. Because not every person is affected by every trait. There's some traits, okay? You all look so wonderful and so calm. But there are people who have a terrible temper. They get very angry. All right? So they may have a 10 in the anger column. You may have a 1 or 2 or a 0. Right? You may be very, very strong in control of your anger. Or you may be very weak. Every person's different, and everyone has a different composition of traits. And that's the beauty of this world. You can have 2 twins who grew up in the same home, have the same parents, have the same friends, dress the same way their entire lives, and uniquely different. Why? Because God created every human being uniquely different and special. No 2 people are alike. Which leads us to another commentary from the Gaon of Vilna, where he says, be careful, be cautious about accepting all criticism from other people. Because if you accept all criticism from all people, you'll never actually bring your talent to fruition. You'll never bring your full strength to fruition. There's a joke they say, I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous class, but you'll excuse me if I do, but it's a pretty good one. Not a joke, it's a sad tale that they say. So there's this Yemenite couple, gets married, bride and groom, they're leaving the wedding hall, and they're outside the wedding hall, and one of their friends brings them a gift. A donkey. Like, wow, this is fantastic. We can get home. So the groom gets on the donkey, and his bride is walking right next to him. So they pass a group of people, and they say, that's the way you treat her the first day? The first day you're married, that's the way you treat your bride? You sit and she walks? He says, you know, you're right. So he sits the bride on the donkey, and he walks next to the bride. He walks next to the donkey. Pass another group of people, and they say, already the first day she's controlling you like that? All right? So they both get on the donkey. They pass another group of people, and they say, poor little donkey. What did he do wrong? You're both smashing the donkey? So they said, you know what, you're right. So they both went and they carried the donkey on their back. They passed another group of people, and they said, look, 3 donkeys. Right? When you do things just because other people say to do it, right? You have to be very, very careful about that. It's a good, very good trait for a person to be accepting. But accepting doesn't mean that everything the person tells you, any person who reprimands you, any person who yells at you, so you take it to heart and maybe think about it. It should be a wake-up call, but it doesn't mean that they're right. And just because they said something doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. And just because they said something doesn't mean that you're not a good spouse. Right? You have to use that as an opportunity to learn from it. Perhaps evaluate. Think about it a little bit more. Okay? So before you just jump into the world of Mussar, which is, again, perfection of our character, maximizing our capabilities, before you just take everything carte blanche, you got to make sure that it actually applies to you. So if you have a 1% anger, and you use it in the right place, and someone comes up, you have a bad temper, right? If you know that it was in control and it was thought through, and it wasn't a temper, it was just an outward appearance. There's a great story about Rabbi Feinstein, the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. You'll hear many stories about him in the coming weeks in the Mussar classes. But one time one of his students was waiting in the waiting room, and the way his house worked, and hundreds of people would come to ask Rabbi Feinstein all different questions. He was waiting in the waiting room. They'd go into the room, and then they'd go out the other side. The exit was on the other side of the office, so people didn't have to see who was in while they possibly overheard a conversation. So the man is waiting in the waiting room, and he hears Rabbi Feinstein yelling at the student and reprimanding him and really giving it to him. The person in the waiting room was wondering, who's in there? What's going on? Right? But he doesn't know, because the person goes out the other door, and now it's his turn. He goes in. He says to Rabbi Feinstein, he says, I never knew you can get so angry. Right? It sounds like you were really heated over there. He says, God forbid. God forbid. He says, no. This person needed to see a stern seriousness. He needed to hear a firmness. So I prepared myself before he came that I'm going to act. I'm going to be an actor. And I'm going to have to make believe I'm angry so that he takes it seriously. He was so calm. Rabbi Feinstein was so calm. Right? For this instant, he needed to exude a sense of anger. But he wasn't really angry. And that's, at times, we have to know how to be able to plan and think. Use our mind, not our instinct, not our reaction. Not to react to things impulsively, but rather to notice when things happen to us, how are we reacting? Pay attention to those reactions. The way you greet someone, how did you greet them? Why did you greet them that way? Look into the deep emotions that go through your day. Are you jealous of someone? Why are you jealous? Are you angry? Why are you angry? What causes you to get to that state? And to really examine, because we are an entire world, an incredible world, filled with gifts, filled with tremendous opportunity. But if we don't know what's inside that world, then we're like blind people. You know, blind following the blind, and blind leading the blind, in many cases. So it's important for us to know what it is that we're here for. What did God give us? What are those gifts that God gave us? Examine them, strengthen them, and use them. Okay? So we spoke about knowing who I am. Who are you? Examine, learn those traits. And then you have to start thinking, where do you want to go? What do you want to be? And then set out a plan of how you're going to get there. It's like any business. You have to put together a business plan. Right? We're a company that sells ice cream. But you know what? We don't actually sell ice cream. We make ice cream, but we don't have a way to sell the ice cream. So we're going to have to sit down and put together a business plan of this is how we're going to make it. It's going to cost us this much a tub. And then we're going to have to put together a strategy of how we're going to sell it and market it. And then we're going to have to evaluate whether or not it's working. I said this before Yom Kippur. I think it's very appropriate to what we're talking about now. I'm just going to make a shakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'dvaro. I apologize. So my rabbi, my rabbi's uncle was a baker, and he opened up a bakery in Brownsville, in the Bronx area, in New York, and it was a very, very successful bakery. Because you remember the story? Oh, okay. So it was a very successful bakery because they had the best prices and they had the best quality food. Quality, price, everybody comes, right? Yeah, that was till they hired a CPA, because they were so busy from the minute they got started. They never got a chance to really do an accounting of where they're holding. They were just, it was so busy. They're just ordering more flour and doing this and selling, and the place was just flying. You get an accountant, and he says, "Guys, I have some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is that we sold a lot of cakes and breads and challahs and cookies. But the bad news is that we lost 5 cents on every single one." And they closed up shop immediately. Right? And this was going on for years. Every single cookie they sold, they had a happy customer, but they lost 5 cents. And if you sell thousands of cookies, it's thousands of dollars. Right? Imagine that. We have to be careful that we're not just expending our energy on areas of life in which we are not going in a successful path. Right? It's like, who says that the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing and expect different results? Right? If anger is not a good thing, then why would you get angry again? If it doesn't work, why would you try it again? Right? If kindness, if there are traits that make you become a better person, why wouldn't you try it again? The problem is that we're not taking into accounting. And we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to examine ourselves. Am I as good as I could be? Am I living up to the expectations that God has of me? Or that I have of me? Right? And that's a big question that needs to be answered. And the only person who can answer it is us. We're the only ones who can answer that question. Okay. So we have to strategize, utilize the traits that are already strong. Every single one of us has traits that are strong. Just look in the mirror. Look at yourself in the mirror and figure out what's good about me. What's good about me? What do you like about me? God, what do you have in mind with me? You put me here. You invested a lot in me, a whole lot. What do you feel is good about me? And if you need some help, you can ask some friends. You can ask family members. Ask them what they see in you. You'll be surprised. You see that people see in you a lot more, possibly, than you see in you. Now, there's one curveball that I'm going to throw into this mix, and that is going to be one that's going to bother you for some time. Okay? It's a good one. Our sages tell us that every person has a trait which is perfect, both in positive and in negative. You have one trait which is absolutely perfect. It's your dominating trait. And the first thing you're going to need to do is figure out what that trait is. Both in positive and in negative. More important to know the positive.
So we're talking two traits.
That's correct. A positive and a negative trait that are both the opposite sides of perfection.
It's really your personal strength and your personal weakness.
That's correct.
Greatest strength, greatest weakness.
That's correct. And it's very, very important for us to identify them. Because if we don't identify them, we'll never be able to work with them. And what can happen is that a child is born, child has this perfect trait of, let's take the easy one, again, kindness. Perfect trait of kindness. And the parents tell them, no, you can't volunteer, you can't help, you can't this, you can't that, you have to be selfish, because if you don't take care of yourself, nobody will take care of you. And his desire to be kind gets squashed. And for 1 year after another year after another year, and then he grows up in an era where everyone's just busy about themselves and self-indulging themselves in whatever pleasures they can. And eventually he doesn't even know that he ever possessed a perfect trait of kindness. No idea. No idea. That's big danger. It's a big danger if a person doesn't know that positive trait. If their positive trait was truth, and all they see around them is people who lie, who people are dishonest. If a person doesn't nurture that trait, they're going to lose it, potentially. Right? Use it or lose it. It's very important to figure out what those traits are and use them. Use those traits. Okay? We'll talk about how we identify what that trait is. There's a worksheet that we've given out. We have a worksheet here for those of you who are not in the class. You have one for yourself?
Yeah.
You don't have one? So I'm out. And okay, so I have. Here's another one. Here's also a recommended reading list. There's 3 copies there. Okay. So now there's another thing here, which we've given out this document, which is the My Traits chart, which you don't have yet. We'll get in a minute. And this is a table that my grandfather recommends for every person to have, which on top you would write that perfect trait that we discussed. On bottom, you would write that perfect negative trait, and then you'd write on the ones leading up to that perfect all of your positive traits, and here are your negative traits. Have it as an accountant. It's private, of course. It's your own personal identity of who you are. But it's important to investigate and to know what are the traits that reside within me. What are those traits? Okay? Now, we mentioned that if a person is not going up, in Judaism, we have a system of growth which is parallel or similar to a ramp. A ramp, you can't stand still on the ramp. You're either going up or you're going down. We are either going up or going down. Think of it as an EKG. You go to the hospital, you visit someone in the hospital, and you see that they're attached to a heart monitor, and on the computer screen, it's showing a bar. It's going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. You're like, that's so, it's so concerning, right? It's going up and down. It should just be going straight, right? No, what happens if it's going straight?
Dead.
You're dead. A human being who's healthy is always going to have ups and downs, and ups and downs. You can have good days where the sun is so bright and the world is so beautiful. You can have some days where you feel like the whole world is crashing down on you. And that's very normal. You can have days where your work on your traits are going to be rock solid. And you're going to be in full control. And there are going to be days that are going to be rotten. That's why God gives us many years of life to work on ourselves. If it was only one day tryout, right, we'd live one day. But God gives us many, many, many years. Many, many, many days, hopefully, to keep on trying, to perfect ourselves, to find another way to become a better person, to practice it, to integrate it into our lives, into the fabric of our being, to become a better person. Right? But if it can only happen if we identify it. If we don't identify those traits, there's no way in the world we'll ever be able to fix them. You're not one day going to just bump into your bad trait and say, hey, what are you doing here? I didn't know you were around. Right? Leave my house. Right? That's not going to work. Right? You have to take the trait, understand it, work on it, and that will help you become a better person. And that will help your relationship with God, because it says that Abraham's trait was kindness. In seeing the kindness that God bestowed upon mankind, he says there has to be a God. But I also want to be God-like. And we see that Abraham was the image of kindness. He was the example of kindness. He wanted to have 4 doors in his tent, so that from any direction people can come. People can know from whichever direction they come, they're always welcome. There's always a door welcoming someone. He's sitting with God, who's visiting him on the 3rd day of after his circumcision, at 100 years old, or 99 years old. And he sees 3 passersby. I said them both ways. Either way is right. Okay, no. One will be right. And I'm not running for president, so it doesn't make a difference. And he says, God, excuse me, I got to take care of these people. Why? Why do you say goodbye to God? Why is that okay for you to just neglect God sitting right there because you have to go, because that's what God wants you to do? That's what he wants you to do. I'll wait. You go go do what you're supposed to do. I'll wait. And God waited for him. It wasn't a short time. He served them each. It says he slaughtered an animal for each of them and gave them water to wash their feet, and he gave them bread, and he gave them this and everything. Kindness. There's no limit for my kindness. But he saw God through that kindness. And he wanted to reflect God. Just as God is all kind, I'm going to be all kind. And I will try to emulate God as just in the way that God is kind, I'm going to try to be kind. That's what we're trying to be. That's how we're trying to grow. To not just be, a kind person because it's a nice thing to do, tikkun olam. That's a shooting in the dark, not knowing where we're shooting. It's about being systematic in how we activate our kindness and doing it in an effective way and being God-like. Any questions so far? Anybody? Anybody back there? You good? Right? Anybody? No questions? Okay, great. That's great.
So being God-like and kindness. Kindness is synonymous with being God-like.
Well, so kindness, God is all kind. Okay, God is all kind. 100% kind. There's no limitations to God's kindness. Now, there's sometimes traits that God needs to activate, right? Where God has to unleash His wrath on people because of some evil deeds they've done. We see this in the Torah. It doesn't take away from God's kindness. God does it in a way of, it says that even the harsh things God does in kindness. Because we don't see the full picture. We're very limited in the perspective that we have. But it says that, for example, the wayward child, which the Talmud, by the way, says is something that never happened and never will happen. So why does the Torah teach it us? Right? The Torah says if there's a child who's at a certain boy who's at a certain age, and he steals from his parents and does certain things, drinks wine, and it's like a whole thing. Right? The wayward child. So the parents bring him to the Bet Din and they put him to death. But if you look at the commentaries, commentary says this is because we have mercy on that child. Because if this is what he is now, as a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, what's going to be when he's a 23-year-old? And what's going to be when he's a 33-year-old? If he's a thief now, what is he going to be then? So it's not that we are vicious people. The Torah is not vicious. There's not one vicious word in the Torah. But the Torah says that this is a sign of kindness, of mercy. And we have to understand it. But we're not going to get into it now. We have many other classes in which we can investigate this. Primarily being in the Torch University, which is going to be on Tuesday nights, where we're going to, from 8 o'clock on, first hour is going to be from 7 to 8. This starts in November. From 7 to 8 is going to be Jewish theology and Jewish thought and the Jewish calendar, Jewish life cycles, etc., etc. And from 8 o'clock on, we're going to continue with our Breakneck Through the Bible, which is an in-depth study of the Torah, inside with the commentaries. And that's one of the things that we're doing is all these stories which we've heard for years that sound a little loosey-goosey, right? We go through it with all the commentaries to understand every single word of it. Because God is all perfect. We say it in our prayers in Yom Kippur. Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim Rav Chesed V'Emet. What are these traits? These are the 13 attributes of mercy that we activate during these days of atonement. God says, say these words, because just as I forgave the Jewish people back when they had the sin of the golden calf, I forgave them. What day of the year was that, by the way? That was Yom Kippur. God says you could use these same 13 attributes every year on Yom Kippur and I'll forgive you as well. So we reactivate those 13 attributes of mercy. We start off with Hashem, Hashem. We say Hashem's name twice. It's two different attributes. One is before a person sins and one is after a person sins. Right? Imagine this. Imagine you know that your child is about to do something bad. What would you do? What would you do?
Attempt to do something or say something to sway his...
Try to divert them. Try to get them out of that, so they don't actually make that mistake. Right? God does the same. Before we sin, God has mercy on us. Okay, but you know what? We didn't listen to His advice, and we didn't get the message, so we sinned. So now He's going to be upset at us. I told you not to do it, and you did it anyway. I couldn't help myself. God has mercy even after the sin. And what's if that goes on day in, day out, day in, day out? God exhibits mercy. Mahu, right? Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun. Just as God is merciful, so too, Afatarachum. Just as God is merciful, we're merciful. We attempt to be merciful. And if someone asks forgiveness, we forgive them. If someone hurts our feelings, we forgive them. You hurt my feelings 2 days in a row. You realize you asked me yesterday if you'd forgive me. You're coming back and you're asking for forgiveness again because you insulted me again? Right? Next time, don't do it, and I won't have to forgive you. No, that's not the way God is. Doesn't hold a grudge against you. You ask for forgiveness, He forgives. You do it again, ask for forgiveness, He'll forgive you again.
Is one objective of this class to identify and maximize your positive traits?
Absolutely.
And identify and minimize.
That's correct. The goal is to identify and maximize your positive traits and identify and minimize your negative traits. But more than just maximize and minimize, because that's a very nice flowery term, what we're trying to do is control our positive and negative traits. Gain full control of them. It's not easy, but it is life. It's life. If you're able to overcome 1 ounce of anger, just control it. You're the strongest person on earth. You're stronger than any MMA, the fighting. What are they? MMA? WWF? What is it? Well, whichever one it is, the fighting, the boxing, you're much stronger than them. To be able to overcome 1 second of anger. Keep your mouth shut for 1 second. I'm not going to say it. Ooh, I had such a zinger. I'm not going to say it. I don't want to embarrass them in front of their family. I don't want to embarrass them in front of their children. I don't want to embarrass them in front of their friends. Keep my mouth shut. Oh, I had to say, you're such a hypocrite. Right? That's it I needed to say. Nope, not going to say it.
And is it synonymous with something we touched upon on Friday, with being a mensch?
Yeah, well, yes. But how do you get to being a mensch? It's a very nice terminology, right?
It's a catch-all phrase.
Yeah, it's a great phrase. What does it really mean to be a mensch? To be a mensch means I am able to work on myself to become a better person and improve and to change and to take 1 small step in becoming a better person. We're not born perfect, but the goal is to leave perfect. Right? So if you're from the camp of people who say, we're never going to be perfect, so what's the point? So this might not be for you. But if you're of the belief that you could attain perfection, which I believe everyone can, and God believes everyone can, which is why He put us here, then this is for you. Abraham worked on his perfection. Isaac worked on his perfection. Jacob worked on his perfection. Our matriarchs all worked on their perfection. And our tribes, and Moses, and Aaron. And don't let Bible criticism confuse you by telling you negative things about our forefathers from a very low perspective. Our sages point out all of the mistakes that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and our matriarchs made and the price they paid for it. But not to make light that they're human beings like we are. Right? They're pillars of the world. Okay. So now we mentioned, I think this is already in the last in the last class that we discussed about that you're going to be tested. You start working on that anger, and God's going to test you. You start working on that patience, and God's is going to test you. You start working on feeling someone else's burden. You know what it means to feel someone else's burden? That can happen, by the way, even if you're not there. Feel someone else's pain. You hear a story in the news. People who lost their homes from the hurricane. People who were killed by the hurricane, God forbid. Someone was in an accident. Oh, it's really terrible, and we just move on. There were people in Israel, just this morning there was a terrorist attack in Israel, last night. 2 people are never going home again. Their family's never going to see them. 2 Israelis. So do we just say it's just terrible, this peace process? Oslo Accords. Just a disaster. Blame whichever president was sitting in office. Look at what they're doing. The UN, we can blame the whole world. Or we can sit and cry and feel the pain of those people who will never see their family again. When we work on that trait, that's going to be one of the things we're going to have to work on. It's going to take a lot of time to feel someone else's pain. But even more than all those people around the world, how about feeling the pain of someone who we live with in our home? Whether it's your child, or your parent, or your spouse. Feel their pain. Think about what they're going through. How challenging their day may have been. But to really feel it, not to just like gloss over it or just say the nice phrases, oh, well, that must be terrible, and move on. Let me just read the paper, stop bothering me. Right? No, really feel it. Feel it. Feel their pain. That's just one trait. Happiness. Kindness, like we mentioned. What are the other traits there? Alacrity, zrizut.
Truth, will.
Truth. To always speak the truth. Not even one white lie. Not even one exaggeration. It's a lot of work to reach perfection. That when there were 8 people there, you don't say there was about 20. Right? There was 8 people. What's the exact? What's the accurate? What's the truth? Only the truth and nothing but the truth. Not because anybody else. Because God is there. Because we want to be God-like. You know why it says by the Haggadah, when we read on the Seder night, Pesach and Passover, it says that it was like midnight. At about midnight, the Jewish people were released from bondage. The Exodus began at about midnight. Why about midnight? Why not exactly midnight? Because if we go around the room here and everybody looks at their clock, I guarantee you everybody will be either 1 minute faster or 1 minute slower, or half a minute faster, half a minute slower, 3 minutes faster. Some people like to have 17 and a half minutes faster because they want to calculate the time. Right? So, 12 o'clock, Egypt time, was different for every person. God says, I don't want to be a liar. I don't want to be seen as a liar. At about midnight. For every person, it'll be a different time. This one it's 11:58. For this one it's 12:05. God is late. No. God's not late. God is exactly. God is perfect in His truth. God is exact. So not even to be misrepresented, not even to be misunderstood. 100% accuracy in every word that we say. That it can't be taken in 2 different directions. Absolute honesty and accuracy. So we know that the cherubs that were in the holy temple, in the tabernacle, they had faces of, you know, the cherubs. These are the two angels, right, with wings, right? They were facing each other, right, on the ark. The Torah tells us that they were faces of children. Why faces of children? Because children represent change. Children have a much easier time changing than we do. Adults have a very difficult time changing. You know why? Because we've become creatures of habit. We get into routines. We learn to say certain phrases, and we keep on saying them. We liked it the first time, we liked it the second time, that's it. This is part of my, right? But maybe it's not truthful. Maybe it's not kind. Maybe it's not nice. Maybe it's not welcoming. Maybe it's not friendly. But a couple of people laughed a few years ago when I started saying it, so I kept on saying it. We get into certain habits of the way we talk, the way we act, the way we eat, the way we drink, the way we watch football. We get into all habits. It's very hard to change those habits. Which is why I may be totally wrong about this, but it is possible that that's why our sages tell us that a boy should get married when he's 18 years old. Mishnah says that. 18 l'chuppah. 18 years to canopy. Get married. Why? Because what happens is the tendency is when people are older, they get more locked in their ways. They get more rigid, more complacent even. And this is the way I've done it my whole life. Right? Since I left my parents' house, this is the way I did my laundry. I don't want this lady coming into my life telling me how to do my laundry. This is where I eat, and this is how I eat, and this is when I hang out with my friends. But when you start off that marriage, that relationship at a younger age, you get molded together. And you gain those habits together. You form a unit which is much more malleable. Okay, that's my own idea. Maybe totally wrong, but I think it's right. Right? I think that's why our sages tell us, 18, you're young enough. This is the age in which you can really affect change in a positive way, because you learn new things from each other and you develop new habits together. Habits that are hopefully healthy habits. Okay. The last step that we're going to talk about today. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that if you're not a child, you're all very, very young here, I see. Everyone's very young. Probably in your early teens, right? Yeah? Okay. So, just remember that Rabbi Akiva didn't know how to read the alphabet when he was 40 years old. Turned 40, didn't know how to read the alphabet. You get what came out of Rabbi Akiva. All the Torah that we have today is from Rabbi Akiva. So your young spring chickens, right? Okay, you can have a lot that we can affect, a lot of change that we can affect in our lives. We mentioned one other idea is that our goal is not to become better, but to change. Change is very, very powerful. Changing a habit, changing one habit is so powerful. That's what we have to look for. We have to look to change. Break a habit. Right? It's not easy. It's much easier said than done. But if you can change that habit, one habit, it is so powerful. Okay, let's continue. So, I'll just tell you a few quick stories. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the modern day founder of the Mussar movement, he was once praying on the high holidays without his own siddur. He didn't have a siddur. So he was looking on with someone else. The other person turned to him and he started yelling at him, "Would you stop hogging my space?" Right? And this was when Rabbi Yisrael realized that Mussar teaching must be brought to the public. This is not the way we act. This is not the way anybody should act. Right? There's a story that's told about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter that one time they were waiting for him Kol Nidre night for him to arrive to synagogue. And he wasn't coming. They started sending people to search for Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. They can't start without the rabbi. So they found him in one of the local houses with a little boy. So they asked him, "What's going on here?" He said, "I was heading to shul and I heard this child crying and crying for his mother. But his mother went to synagogue for Kol Nidre. So I stayed here to comfort him. I stayed here to say she shouldn't be afraid. She shouldn't be worried." Right? That's greatness. There's a story told about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein that he was once, he had an entire entourage following him, paparazzi, right? Following him to the car every day when he left the yeshiva. He was such a holy man. People would come and walk with him to the car and they'd ask him questions. People would want to get a blessing from him. So one time they finally closed the door after he gets in the car, and when the driver drives Rabbi Feinstein about a block away or so from the yeshiva and they're out of the sight from the yeshiva, Rabbi Feinstein asks the driver, "If you don't mind, can you please stop?" He says, "Sure." And Rabbi Feinstein opens the door and pulls his hand out of the door and then closes the door. You know how painful it is to have your hand at the door? But they didn't realize, whoever closed the door didn't realize that Rabbi Feinstein's hand was caught in the door. So the driver asked him, he says, "It's very painful. Why didn't you tell me right away in advance? Why didn't you tell me when they closed the door?" He says, "Do you know how embarrassed that person would be if they knew that they closed the door in my hand?" Can you imagine the sensitivity? Sensitivity of that's a great person who understands who he is, who knows his position, who knows how much people respect him, and understands that if he were to say something, if he were to do something, this person would never live with themselves. Never be able to imagine you will cause so much pain to the rabbi. It's not worth embarrassing somebody. There's another story, I'll tell you this quick story about another one about Rabbi Feinstein. I love this story. It's one of my favorite stories. A woman calls up Rabbi Feinstein's house on Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon. It's all hectic in the house. Every house is hectic. And Rabbi Feinstein that afternoon wasn't available. For whatever reason, he was busy with doing something. So one of his students picked up the phone. Said, "Hello, Rabbi, can I please speak to Rabbi Feinstein?" There's an old lady on the other side of the phone, on the other end. So the student says, "I'm sorry, is there anything I hear Rabbi Feinstein is not available? Is there anything I can help you with?" So the woman says, "Yeah, I just wanted to call and ask what time candlelighting was." So the person says to himself, "Doesn't she understand? He said, Rabbi Feinstein, you don't call Rabbi Feinstein for such silly questions." Right? See, he tells her, candlelighting time is going to be at 6:43, but you don't need to call Rabbi Feinstein for this. Any Jewish calendar has the candlelighting time. I can send you a calendar. You don't have to waste Rabbi Feinstein's time for this. She says, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've called Rabbi Feinstein for 25 years. He never said anything about calendars." Imagine that. Rabbi Feinstein for 25 years took this woman's call every Friday afternoon and told her what time candlelighting is. She may have opened up the yellow pages for a local rabbi. What time candlelighting is? She has no idea what Rabbi Feinstein is. She doesn't know that he's the greatest sage to ever step foot in the United States of America. No idea. But he didn't care. That's pure kindness. That's understanding another person. That's midot. That's good character traits. That's what it's about. Okay, let's get to one more idea over here. And that is, so we said the Torah doesn't just tell us stories. The Torah is teaching us lessons of how to live our lives. Okay, there's another thing, is that there are many things, many traits that each of us possess. And I guarantee you, if I were to ask you about certain traits that each of us possess over here, you would say, yes, it's true. I know that I have this bad trait, but fill in the blank. Right? Mussar is taking those things that we know and putting them into action. And we're going to learn how to do that. Putting them into action. Taking and accounting and doing it in a methodical way of perfecting our character. Okay? Now, there's another thing, is that we must remember that the most important tool that we need in working on our character is small steps. Anybody here ever go work out? Okay, so you go work out the first time, and you're not loose, right? So they say, hey, let's go. Start doing pull-ups. Right? You can do a half a pull-up. No. There's no such thing. Okay, you know what? Forget it. Let's go to the weights. You go to the weights, and they say, here's 150 pounds. Lift it. Let's go. What's going to happen?
You can't lift it.
You can't lift it. Why not?
Because you have to work up.
Because you got to work up to it. All right, so what do people do when they're working on their character? They say, you know what? I'm never going to get angry again. That's about lifting a 2,000-pound dumbbell. Right? Try it. You can be able to move it? Not happening. So what do? You start with 5 pounds. 5 pounds. So easy. Look at this. I can do it. Pretty impressive. Okay. Next day you feel a little bit sore. But you know what? Do another time 5 pounds. And then you can go maybe 7.5 pounds. And then eventually to 10 pounds. And then eventually to 15 pounds. I remember that after many years that I was sitting in yeshiva and learning, I didn't do exercise for a long time. Very long time. And I was about to go to a summer camp where I was going to be super active, and I was hyper conscious about being out of shape. I said, you know what? I have a great idea. I'm going to go, not far from where my yeshiva was, there was an Olympic-sized pool. I said, you know what? I'm going to go swimming. And I'll just swim as many laps as I can, and I'll be back in shape. One shot. So I go to the pool, I jump in the pool, and I start swimming. And in one lap, I say, you know, I can do another lap. I do a second lap. I can do another lap. I do 3, 10, 15, 20. How much more can I do? So you know what? I got to get to 25. Got to get to 20. There's no stopping. I get to 25. Get to 30. Finally get to 69 laps. Okay? Crazy, right? No, I didn't know when to stop. My body told me when to stop. And then I pulled a muscle. And I couldn't walk for the rest of the summer. It was probably a tear in my muscle. If you try to do too much too fast, there's no way you're getting in shape. There's no way that you're going to be able to fix that. You're going to abuse it, never want to do it again. So our sages tell us the smallest possible step you can take is the best. but it's got to be so small that it's almost a joke. It's only 5 pounds. It's like, really? That's what I came here for, to lift 5 pounds? Yes. Because if you don't do the 5 pounds, you'll never be able to do the 10 pounds. You can't start with the 10 pounds. Start with something which is so small and insignificant. So you're going to work on a certain trait? Great. Make sure that what you accept on yourself is so small. Don't say, you know what? Every hour, I'm going to find a way to do an act of kindness. You know how many hours that's going to last you? You guessed it. Maybe 1, maybe 2. Find something small. Something which is almost laughably small. It is so small, it's like, come on, really? That's it? That's what you're accepting upon yourself? Yeah, that's what you're accepting upon yourself. Because that gets the engine rolling. That's what gets it started. And once you've got it started, then one thing can build on the next thing, that can build on the next thing in a very organic, natural way. But if we jump, it's like a mountain climber. Mountain climber has to put in 1 peg, latch on, go to put in the next one, latch on. What's if you try to jump? What's going to happen? You're going to fall all the way down. You lose it all. It's exactly the way we are in our spirituality. We need to take one small step at a time. Because only if we take one small step at a time will we be able to be effective in our growth. So this concludes our introduction to Mussar. We're going to begin the first class on Monday, November 7th, the day before Election Day. And we're going to discover the traits that we all possess, that we all love and want to perfect. And join us Monday, November 7th, 7:30 here at the Torch Center. And may we all be sealed in the book of life for a year filled with health, happiness, success, true success, and have a fruitful, beautiful new year. Shana Tova and Ktiva v'Chatima Tova. We should be written and inscribed and sealed in the book of life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for learning together with me. Now I can unbutton my top button. Thank you.